Right after our father passed, my brother presented a will that gave him everything. I almost believed it, until I received a handwritten letter from Dad that shattered the lie and revealed the truth he tried to bury. And, trust me, this letter didn't just expose him. It changed everything. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 41, a mother of two, a project manager at a mid-sized architecture firm in Portland. And if I'm being honest, someone who used to believe love could be scheduled into weekends and phone calls. I was in the middle of a quarterly planning meeting when I noticed 3 missed calls from my father, Robert Whitmore. He rarely called, and when he did, he never called more than once. 3 calls meant something was wrong. My heart caught in my throat, but instead of calling back immediately, I told myself, I'll ring him on my lunch break. I didn't. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I finally sat down on the porch steps, phone pressed to my ear, guilt blooming in my chest like a bruise. His voice was softer than I remembered. Claire, he said, I think it's time I stopped driving. I didn't say anything right away. Just let the words fall. Let them hang between us like fog. He continued, slower this time, like every syllable carried more weight than it used to. I had a little incident. Nothing big. No one was hurt. But I forgot where I parked, and then I forgot why I even left the house. A pause. A sigh. I think I need to move. Maybe somewhere closer to you. I remember looking out over the street. Cars passing, kids riding bikes, the sound of someone watering their lawn. My world didn't stop. But something inside me did. I should have said yes. I should have said, of course, Dad. We'll figure it out. But I didn't. Instead, I offered the coward's answer. Can I think about it? It's just we're juggling so much right now. The kids, work, Derek's job, you know. I understand, he said, and he meant it. He always did. That was the worst part. Growing up, my father was the kind of man you never had to ask twice. He was steady, present, not extravagant or overly emotional, but warm in his quiet way. He packed my lunches with little handwritten notes, waited outside dance recitals even when he had work early. When I broke my arm in 6th grade, he sat by my hospital bed reading The Secret Garden, in a voice that cracked on every line. After Mom passed away, he never remarried. He mowed the lawn, paid the bills, and kept her garden alive. Every year on her birthday, he left a letter tucked behind the lilac bush. He thought I didn't know, but I did. And yet, when he called, not asking for help, but asking to be near, I hesitated. I weighed his presence against the inconvenience. I told myself I needed time, that he'd be fine for a few more months, that I'd make time later. The truth? I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to have him close. Of watching the man I'd always leaned on begin to lean on me. It's one thing to love your parents, it's another to watch them become fragile. And I was selfish. I didn't want to rearrange my carefully calibrated life. Didn't want to squeeze hospital visits between board meetings or explain why Grandpa cried during dinner. But more than all of that, I think I didn't want to admit he was aging. That the man who fixed leaky faucets and taught me how to ride a bike now forgot why he went to the store. So I let him go back to his small town, his quiet kitchen, his empty house. 2 weeks later, I mailed him a birthday card. Inside, I wrote, "Thinking of you always. Let's talk soon." He never called back. A month after that, my brother Nathan visited him for a weekend and said everything seemed normal enough. Dad had stopped driving, started taking the community shuttle. He'd even joined a book club, Nathan said. So I let myself believe that he was adjusting, that maybe my silence hadn't hurt as much as I feared. But I also didn't ask questions. I didn't offer help. I didn't go. There's something cruel about the way time reveals our mistakes. Not with a scream, but a whisper. You don't realize the damage until the quiet becomes unbearable. And even then, we tell ourselves stories. He's just busy. He's independent. He knows I love him. But phone calls are not hugs. And thinking of you does not warm a lonely kitchen. If I had known what was coming, I would have driven there that very night. I would have sat across from him at the dining table, held his hands in mine, and said, "Move in next door." We'll plant lilacs and drink tea on the porch. But I didn't. I left my father to grow old in silence, all because I was too wrapped up in the noise of my own life. This story isn't about blame. Not exactly. It's about what happens when you say later to the people who need you now. And it's about what my father left behind, not just in a will or a house, but in a letter that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our family. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter arrived, almost 3 months after Dad passed. I had just gotten the kids off to school. My youngest had spilled orange juice on his backpack and cried because he forgot his library book. The dishwasher was leaking again. And somewhere between wiping the counters and checking emails, I noticed a plain white envelope sitting in our mailbox, addressed to me in handwriting I knew too well. Robert Whitmore. No return address. Just his name. For a moment I froze. It felt like a mistake. Or a trick. My father was gone. I had watched the coffin lower into the earth. I had spoken at his memorial. Words I barely remember now, except for how tight my throat had felt. And yet there it was, a piece of him in my hand. Inside was a single page. Faded ink. Careful strokes. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, I imagine the days feel both too full and strangely empty. That's how grief works. It crowds the room and leaves it hollow at the same time. I didn't want to burden you with decisions while I was alive. I know your world moves fast. I never wanted to be the reason it slowed. I had to sit down. My hands trembled as I read. There were days I wished you had said yes. When I asked to move closer, I didn't mean I needed care, I meant I needed connection. I missed your voice. Your mother's garden. The laughter in your kitchen. I wanted to belong again. That line hit harder than any accusation could have. He hadn't asked for help. He'd asked for presence. For a place to feel seen. To feel real. I'm not angry, Claire. I know you loved me. I believe you still do. But love, I've learned, is only half the story. The rest is time. And showing up. Tears blurred the words.
I had to stop and start again.
Then came the part that changed everything. As for my estate, you might be surprised. I didn't leave it to either of you. Not because I wanted to punish, but because I wanted to give where love was needed most. I left everything to the Willow Lane Foundation, the home where your mother used to volunteer, and the orphanage 2 streets over from it. I've watched them do more with less than I ever thought possible. I felt my breath catch. I trust Nathan will take this with grace. And if he does not, I trust you will remind him who he was when he was 8 years old, when he gave his favorite comic book to a boy in foster care, just because he said he liked Spider-Man. And then the final words. You too are my greatest legacy. I don't need a plaque or a name on a wing. I just want you to remember how it felt to be a family, not a perfect one, just a present one. I read that letter 3 times before I folded it back into the envelope. My heart thudded in a strange rhythm. Grief, guilt, clarity, grief again. I thought I had cried enough at his funeral. I hadn't. Not even close. That evening I told Derek, the kid's father, now my ex, about the letter. He listened quietly, not interrupting once, which was rare for him. Are you okay? He finally asked. I shrugged. I don't know. I think he forgave me before I even realized I needed forgiveness. He nodded slowly. That sounds like your dad.
And it did.
2 days later, the storm came. I received a call from Mr. Connors, my father's longtime estate lawyer in Edgeville. There's a complication, he said, his voice tight. We've uncovered 2 different versions of your father's will. One filed recently, naming your brother Nathan as sole heir. The other, dated earlier, notarized, and matching the intentions expressed in the letter you received. My blood ran cold. He faked a will? I whispered. We can't say that for certain yet, Mr. Connors replied. But the signatures on the recent one are questionable. We're conducting a handwriting analysis. I hung up in silence, ball rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I opened my phone, scrolled back to the only picture I had saved from Dad's last visit, the 2 of us in the backyard, him wearing a ridiculous sun hat Ellie made for him. his smile more amused than joyful. I stared at it for a long time. That man trusted his children to do the right thing. And now I had to decide what that meant. I didn't tell Nathan right away. I needed to gather myself first, to decide if I wanted revenge or resolution. Because the thing about betrayal is this. It begs you to match it, to mirror its darkness. But my father hadn't. Even in death, he chose compassion over control. Could I do the same? But before I could act, I received another envelope, this one from Nathan. Inside was a copy of the altered will. Highlighted sections. A typed note. This is what he wanted, Claire. Don't make this into something it's not.
No signature. No explanation.
Just a command, veiled in justification. My hands didn't shake this time. I walked upstairs, opened my nightstand drawer, and took out Dad's letter again. He had written the truth. With no money.
No threats.
Just ink and conviction. He didn't raise me to be naive. He raised me to be decent. And sometimes, decency meant standing up, even to the people you once admired most. I didn't respond to Nathan's letter right away. For days. It sat unopened on my kitchen counter, just below the fruit bowl no one ever touched. I went about my routine, packing lunches, sitting in traffic, half listening to Zoom meetings, while that envelope burned through the air like static. Every time I passed it, I could almost hear Dad's voice, calm but clear. Claire. Some truths don't need shouting. Just standing still long enough to be seen. I knew what I had to do. But first, I had to look at Nathan. Not as the brother I used to adore, but as the man he'd become. And maybe, to be fair, the man I had stopped truly seeing years ago. Nathan was 6 years older than me, and for most of my childhood, he was my everything. He built my treehouse, took the blame when I crashed Mom's ceramic bowl, snuck me snacks when I had braces, and wasn't allowed candy. He was my hero, until the world started measuring us differently. He struggled through high school, took odd jobs, tried college twice. I, on the other hand, checked every box. Scholarships, degrees, a family, a mortgage. Dad never said it out loud. But I think Nathan felt it, that quiet weight of comparison. When Mom died, I was in New York interviewing with a publishing firm. Nathan was home. He handled the hospice, the funeral, the ashes. I flew in 12 hours too late. He never blamed me. But something between us shifted. Now, years later, I was holding proof that he had forged a will to cut me out and, more importantly, to erase Dad's final wish. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about legacy. About what Dad wanted his life to mean after he was gone. I needed to confront Nathan. But I didn't want lawyers or shouting matches. I wanted the truth. And maybe, deep down, I wanted to see if there was still a version of my brother left, the one who used to carry me piggyback through thunderstorms. I called him. He didn't answer. I texted. Can we meet? Not to fight. Just to talk. His reply came 20 minutes later. Tomorrow. 5 p.m. Dad's place. Dad's place. Not home. Not the house. That told me everything about where Nathan stood. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The garden was dry, untrimmed. The porch light flickered like a tired eye. I stood at the gate for a full minute before stepping in. Nathan opened the door before I knocked. He looked tired, but not broken. His jaw clenched the way it always did when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to say it first. Claire,
he said.
Like it was just another day. I walked in. The air smelled like dust and something I couldn't name, maybe neglect, maybe memory. We sat in the living room. The same old brown couch. The coffee table with the chipped corner.
No lawyers. No witnesses.
Just us. I got your note. I began. He looked away. I figured. I took a breath. You forged Dad's will. Silence. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. Do you want to explain why? He leaned back, arms crossed. Because I was here, Claire. I was here when he stopped eating. When he fell in the shower. When the neighbors called me because he wandered 2 blocks down thinking he was back in 1989. Where were you? I started but stopped. What could I say? That I was busy? That I had meetings?
Kids?
He laughed bitterly. You were posting birthday pictures on Instagram while I was changing his bedsheets. His voice cracked at the end. And suddenly, I didn't see a villain. I saw someone drowning, holding on to the only thing he thought could keep him afloat: control. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't know he was that bad. That's the point, he replied. You didn't want to know. We sat in the silence that only siblings can share, one built from both love and damage. I'm not here for the money, I said. I got a letter from him. And he wanted this to go to Willow Lane.
To the orphanage.
To people who needed it more than us. Nathan blinked, and for the first time, his eyes softened. He said that. I nodded. He even remembered when you gave away your favorite comic book at age 8. He asked me to remind you.
He laughed. Not bitterly this time.
More like a bubble rising in a muddy well. That stupid Spider-Man book, he murmured. I forgot all about that. We talked for a long time after that. Not about the will. Not about lawyers or consequences.
We talked about Dad.
About the time he built a makeshift sled for a snow day that lasted 4 hours. About how he made pancakes in the shape of our initials every birthday morning. About how he still kept Mom's garden alive, one plant at a time. Nathan cried.
So did I.
And when the sun dipped below the trees, I stood to leave. He followed me to the porch and said, I'll tell Mr. Connors to void the second will. You were right. No, I said. Dad was back home. I tucked Dad's letter into a wooden box on my nightstand. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. And that night, when Ellie asked me if Grandpa would have liked her science project, I said he would have loved it. Then I paused, looked at her, and added, he would have loved you. Because some stories shouldn't be locked in drawers. They should be passed down, carefully, truthfully, and with love. A week after Nathan and I spoke, I returned to Dad's house alone. Not to argue. Not to settle anything.
Just to be there.
The front steps creaked like old bones under my weight. I still had the key. It felt too quiet when the door clicked open. As if the house was holding its breath, waiting for a voice that would never come again. I walked through each room like I was tracing the outline of a ghost. The living room still had Dad's recliner in the corner, angled perfectly to catch the morning sun. On the wall, above the old fireplace, was the photo he always refused to take down, me and Nathan on the beach, 1993. Both of us in bucket hats. Dad had taken the photo and insisted it was the only masterpiece he ever made. I sat on the recliner and let the silence sink in. This house wasn't large. It wasn't polished. But it held stories like pressed flowers in a book, fragile, sacred, never meant to be discarded. In the hallway, I noticed something odd. There was a small box on the shelf with my name on it, written in Dad's all-cap scrawl. Claire, for later. My throat tightened as I reached for it. Inside, my first crayon drawing of our family, crooked stick arms, a house with no windows. The gold medal I won for spelling bee in 5th grade. A cassette tape labeled Dance Recital 1994. And a letter, folded, worn at the edges. I opened it, already knowing what kind of man would save these things for 30 years. Claire Bear. You probably forgot all about these. I didn't. I kept them because they reminded me that I did at least one thing right in this world. Being your dad was the only job I never quit, never doubted, never regretted. If you're reading this, it probably means the house is empty now. But if you listen carefully, you might still hear your mother humming in the kitchen. You might still feel my footsteps in the hallway. Not haunting, just holding. I clutched the letter like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. I wandered to the backyard next. The lilac bush Mom had planted was still there, overgrown but blooming. I hadn't stood beside it in over a decade. Kneeling beside it, I noticed something odd. Buried just under the mulch was a rusted cookie tin. Inside, a photograph of Mom smiling in a wide-brimmed hat. A bundle of dried lavender tied with twine. Another letter. Dad had written to her every year. This one said, Margie, the house still smells like you when the sun hits the windows just right. Claire still laughs like you when she thinks no one's listening. Nathan, he's hurting but trying.
You'd be proud of them.
I wish I'd done better. But I'm trying too. I love you. Always.
Er.
I closed the tin slowly. For all his quietness, Dad had spent his life speaking in gestures that required listening beyond words. The next morning, I brought Ellie with me. She was curious, wide-eyed. As we stepped into the house, she clutched my hand. Was this Grandpa's house? She asked. Yes, baby. This was his home. We walked through together. I showed her the treehouse he built for me, the drawer where he kept candy hidden, the porch swing where he used to read the newspaper and hum Sinatra off-key. In the kitchen, she found an old Polaroid photo of Dad in an apron, flour on his nose. Was he baking? Always, I smiled. Mostly cinnamon bread, but sometimes cookies just because. She held the photo like it was treasure. Later, we sat on the porch swing together, sharing a blanket. Why didn't we see Grandpa more? She asked. I hesitated. Because I didn't make time. I admitted. I thought he'd always be there. Ellie leaned against my side. I think he'd like us being here now. Me too, I whispered. That night, I spoke to Nathan again. He sounded lighter, like something inside him had softened. I found Dad's box of memories, I said. He chuckled. He had one for me too. Baseball cards. A note about how I used to call him Rocket Dad because he ran so fast. I could hear him smiling. Maybe we should do something, I suggested, with the house. Sell it? No. I mean something Dad would have loved. Something good. A pause. Then, like what? I don't know. A reading space for kids. A community garden. A place that feels like him. Nathan didn't answer right away. Then he said, let's think about it. Together. It was the first time he'd said together in years. A week later, we met with the Willow Lane Foundation. Nathan handed over the documents to confirm Dad's true will.
No lo oyes.
No fight. The director cried when she heard about Dad's letter. This will help so many, she said. He didn't just donate, he believed. And he did. Dad had given more than his house. He'd given an example. A lesson. That family is not bound by blood alone, but by care, attention, and the daily choosing to show up. I still go back, sometimes. The porch swing is still there. The lilac bush, still stubborn and wild. And every spring, Ellie and I plant something new in the garden. One flower for every story he told. One tree for every memory he saved. One life, lived simply but fully.
Spring came late that year.
The snow melted reluctantly, like it, too, wasn't ready to say goodbye. But the lilacs bloomed on schedule, lavender and bold, and somehow that felt like a promise kept. The garden in my father's backyard, once neglected and dry, had begun to stretch its limbs again. Ellie and I had planted new bulbs 2 weeks earlier. She named them, every single one.
Hope.
Patience.
Brave.
Sunflower, oddly for a daffodil. It was her way of making sense of things. Mine was different. I found myself waking at 3 a.m. replaying old voicemails from Dad. Ones I used to delete. Somehow I hadn't. Maybe some part of me had always known I'd need them later. Hey, kiddo. Just checking in. That bread recipe you wanted, it's behind the flour jar. And yes, you can substitute almond milk. But it won't taste as good. Love you. That one was my favorite. Nathan and I had begun speaking more often, at first out of necessity, then out of habit. Now we were approaching something stranger. Comfort. We decided not to sell Dad's house. Not yet. Instead, we were turning it into something different. A kind of hybrid community space. Not quite a shelter, not quite a center. Just somewhere people could go when life got too heavy to carry alone. We called it the Watchlight. A nod to Dad's old habit of leaving the porch light on, even when no one was coming. Especially when no one was coming. One afternoon, while sorting through the attic, I found another box labeled in Dad's handwriting. For whoever needs it most. Inside, 3 wool scarves. Hand-knitted. A folder of coupons, neatly clipped, a coffee mug that said "Best Grandpa Ever," and a notebook. The notebook was the part that undid me. Page after page of memories, addressed not to me or Nathan but to the world. No names, just moments. Saw a man on the bus give up his seat for a woman holding a crying child. Thought of Claire. The day she screamed in the supermarket and Margie cried the whole way home. Watched Nathan fix the neighbor's mailbox after school. Never told me. The neighbor did. Left bread on Mrs. Hansley's porch. She never said thank you. That's not the point. It was like Dad had created his own record of kindness. Not to prove anything, but to remember. To honor. Later that week, I read one of the pages out loud at the Watchlight's soft opening. We'd invited a few friends, some local families, and staff from the Willow Lane Foundation. Nathan stood in the back, hands in his pockets, his daughter Rosie clinging to his arm. I said, "This space is about showing up. Not perfectly, not always on time, but fully. It's about second chances. And third. And however many it takes to remember that we belong to each other, even when we forget." Afterward, someone came up to me and said, "It feels like your father's still here." And for the first time, I didn't cry. I smiled. He never really left. A few days later, I got a phone call from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Marla. She had worked the night shift at the grocery store near Dad's place. "I didn't know how to reach you before," she said, her voice shaky. "But I found your number through the Watchlight announcement." She paused. "Your dad used to come in every Tuesday night. We all loved him. But there was this one time a customer had their card declined, and before I could even say anything, he'd already paid for their groceries." Quietly, just nodded at me. I felt my eyes burn. "He told me something that night," she added. Said, "You don't need to be a saint to make someone's day better. You just need to notice them." I never forgot that. Neither would I. Grief doesn't vanish. It shape shifts. Some days it came to me as silence, thick and weighty, in the middle of a meeting. Other days it was sharp, like seeing a man in a tan coat that looked just like his. But then there were days like that one with Marla. Days that layered meaning over the pain. Days that let memory bloom without drowning. One Saturday, Nathan brought over Rosie. She and Ellie ran around the yard, inventing some kind of fairy spy agency under the lilac bush. I caught Nathan staring at them. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I was just thinking how easy it is to forget what matters. How easy it is to get lost in what you think you deserve." He kicked at the dirt a little. "I wanted Dad's house because I thought it would make me feel chosen. Like he picked me. Like I mattered." "You always mattered," I said. "You just couldn't hear it over the noise." He looked up. "Well, I hear it now." That night, I tucked Ellie into bed. She asked if she could keep one of Grandpa's old scarves. "Of course," I said. She wrapped it around her neck 3 times. "Smells like cinnamon and old books," she said. "Sounds about right." Then she asked, "Do you think he's proud of us?" And I thought about the letters, the notebook, the lilacs, the lives being changed at the Watchlight. I kissed her forehead. "I know he is." Summer arrived slowly that year, as if the world, like us, wasn't quite ready to move on. By mid-June, the Watchlight was more than a name. It had become a place. People came, not in crowds, but in quiet waves. A single mother looking for someone to talk to after her shift. A retired teacher who brought books for the lending shelf. A boy who just needed a place to sit and not be told to leave. Sometimes, they came and said nothing at all. They just sat in the back room, where the sun warmed the floorboards through the dusty windows, and they let stillness be the answer to something unspoken. Dad would have liked that. Nathan surprised me one afternoon by showing up with paint cans. "We're not painting the house," I said. He shrugged. "We're not painting it white again, that's for sure." Together, we repainted the kitchen, pale green, the same shade as the dress Mom wore in their wedding photo. "Remember that awful Christmas she made us wear matching sweaters?" I asked, grinning. "I still have mine," Nathan said. "Rosie uses it as a pajama now." That image, His daughter curled in a sweater our mother once bought on clearance was somehow both funny and sacred. Later, Ellie found an old cassette player in the hall closet. She plugged it in, and, miraculously, it still worked. She pressed play. At first it was static. Then came a voice, warm, worn, slightly surprised. "If this thing's working, hi, kids. I'm trying to record a story. One of your mom's favorites." We all froze. Dad's voice filled the room like the scent of old wood and cinnamon. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who didn't like thunder. So her dad told her that thunder was just the sky talking to the ground. And when she asked what it was saying, he said, "Thank you for holding me up." Ellie looked at me. "Was that you?" I nodded, tears slipping silently down my cheek. That was me. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch. I thought about legacy. We often mistake it for what's written in legal documents or etched into gravestones. But maybe real legacy is quieter. Maybe it lives in the way a child repeats a bedtime story, or in the shape of a garden that keeps blooming long after the gardener is gone. I didn't care about the bank statements anymore. The inheritance. Even the property. I cared about the fact that Dad had recorded his voice just in case we needed to hear it again. And we did. More than he'd ever know. One morning in July, I took Ellie to Willow Lane. She brought a batch of chocolate chip cookies she'd made herself. They were slightly burnt on the bottom, but no one minded. The children there didn't ask who we were. They just handed her markers and started drawing. A boy with bright eyes looked up at me and said, "Are you the lady whose dad gave us the library books?" I blinked. "He used to come here, right?" he asked. "They said he brought us stuff." I smiled.
Yes.
That was my dad. He nodded thoughtfully. He was cool. It was the highest compliment. I started volunteering at Willow Lane once a week. Sometimes I brought snacks. Sometimes I just read aloud. I found one of Dad's old books in their shelf, The Little Prince, his favorite. Inside the cover was his handwriting. "To whoever needs to remember that the heart sees best." I traced the words with my thumb. Nathan began showing up, too. He fixed a broken swing, repaired a fence. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. The staff learned our names. The kids did too. We weren't trying to be saints. We were just showing up. In August, Ellie asked if we could hold a Grandpa Day at the Watchlight. "We can invite people who miss someone," she said, "and they can tell stories." It wasn't on any calendar. It wasn't a holiday, but it became one. We brought a box where people could drop letters to their loved ones. Some were long. Some just said, "I miss you." We made cinnamon bread just like Dad used to. A woman in her 70s stood up at the end and shared a memory about her brother who died in the war. She hadn't spoken his name in 40 years. The next day, she came back and planted a marigold bush near the porch. Said she wanted something that wouldn't forget. And that, I realized, was what we were doing. Building places that wouldn't forget. Not just for Dad, but for all the people this world let slip through the cracks. The quiet ones. The tired ones. The ones who think no one notices. We noticed, because he taught us how. One evening, as summer began to wane, I stood in the backyard with Nathan. The sun dipped low, throwing gold across the fence. "I think he'd be proud of us," I said. Nathan nodded slowly. "You know what gets me?" "What?" "He didn't need us to be perfect. He just needed us to come back." And we had. Not just to the house, but to each other. I tucked Ellie in that night. She held her grandpa's scarf close and asked, "Do you think heaven has porches?" I paused. "I don't know," I said. "But if it does, I bet your grandpa's sitting on one right now, watching the sky, waiting for thunder." By September, the garden at the Watchlight had turned into something beautiful. Not perfect. Wild in places. A bit uneven. But honest. The marigolds bloomed first. Then the lilacs, despite being months out of season, somehow refused to die. Ellie swore it was Grandpa's doing. I didn't argue. It felt right, letting a little magic linger in her world longer than it stayed in mine. We started hosting community dinners every second Thursday. Nothing extravagant, pasta, soup, homemade bread when we could manage it. No sign-up sheets. No requirements. Just a place to sit and be seen. People came. They always came. One night, after dinner, a young man lingered behind. He was maybe 20.
Gaunt.
Wary. He picked at the corner of the table, eyes flicking up and away like he couldn't decide if he wanted to be noticed or forgotten. "You good?" I asked. He hesitated. Then, "Your dad, he ever talk to strangers?" "All the time," I smiled. He swallowed. "He once bought me lunch at that diner off Maple. I was living out of my car then." He didn't ask questions. Just said, "Everybody deserves a warm meal. And a second chance." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. "He never told me your name," he said. But I remembered his. I nodded. "Robert. Robert," he repeated. I wanted to say thanks. "I'm okay now. Still trying, but okay." Then he slipped out the door before I could respond. That was my father. He didn't fix the world. He just made it softer in the places where it was sharp. And now, through this space, I was learning to do the same. Not because I was good, but because I was trying. Trying, Dad would say, was holy work. That same week, Nathan surprised me. He showed up at my door with a folder in hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should put the house in trust. Protect it. Make sure the watch light keeps going no matter what." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" He nodded. I was holding on because I didn't want to let go of the house. Now I know we're not letting go. We're letting it live. Just in a different way. We signed the paperwork the next day. No drama. No doubt. Just trust in each other. And in the man who brought us back together even after he was gone. Later, I found myself walking through the old hallway again. That's when I noticed the faintest scrape along the baseboard, just beneath the coat rack. I knelt down. There was a loose panel in the wall. Inside, folded and yellowed, was a tiny drawing.
Crayon.
Sloppy letters. To Dad. "I love you even when you say no." From Claire.
I remembered that night.
I had asked for ice cream before dinner. He had said no. I cried. Then later, I left that note in his coat pocket. He must have saved it. Not for money. Not for sentiment. But maybe to remind himself that love can look like limits. That saying no was just another way of saying, "I want you safe." The more I learned about Dad, the more I realized how little I had truly seen him when he was alive. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't know how. The world teaches us to value action, to measure worth in output, milestones, noise. But Dad's life was built on the invisible things. Refilling the bird feeder, keeping spare umbrellas in the car, writing letters no one asked for, making spaces where people could be small without being ashamed. Ellie once asked me what Grandpa did for a living. "He made people feel like they mattered," I answered. She considered that. "That's a good job." "Yeah," I said. "The best one there is." One day in early October, I took a walk alone. No headphones. No to-do list. I ended up at the cemetery. Dad's stone was simple. Just his name, birth and death dates, and one line. "Leave the light on." I sat down beside it. Not to cry. Not even to talk. Just to be near him. The wind rustled the trees. A squirrel darted by. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing jazz on a porch. Life. It never stops. It doesn't wait for us to catch up. But it also leaves doors open, little ones. Enough for healing to slip in if we're brave enough to stay still long enough to feel it. That night, I started writing a letter to Ellie. I didn't know why. Maybe because Dad wrote to me. Maybe because I needed to say the things we forget to say in real time. Dear Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope you've grown into the wildest, kindest version of yourself. I hope you laugh too loudly and love too much. I hope you make mistakes that teach you, not shame you. I hope when you miss me, you come to the garden. Pull weeds. Smell the lilacs. Remember that I believed in you. That I believe in you always. I folded it gently and placed it in a small tin marked, "For Ellie, when it's time." Because one day, the torch will pass again. and I want her to know how to carry it. Grief is strange. It doesn't leave. It just learns to sit beside you. But so does love. So does memory. And so does light. Fall came earlier than usual. The leaves outside the watchlight turned quickly, red, gold, then brittle brown. The wind carried the scent of earth and change. Ellie said it smelled like Grandpa's flannel jacket. I said it smelled like October. Maybe it was both. The porch light flicked on automatically at 6:03 every evening. We never changed the setting. Nathan said it was better that way. Dad had programmed it before he passed, and in some strange way, it felt like he was still flipping the switch himself. "Leave the light on," he used to say. "You never know who's trying to find their way home." We hosted our first community harvest dinner in October. We expected 20. 60 came. The tables in the backyard were cobbled together from spare planks and mismatched chairs. Someone brought apple pie. Another brought a guitar. A teenage girl read a poem about losing her mother. An older man wept through a story about a dog he'd had for 17 years. And no one flinched. There was no awkward silence. No rush to move on. We just let it happen. The grief.
The joy.
The pieces of life we usually hide behind tight smiles and tighter schedules. We made space for them. After the last guest left, Ellie helped gather empty dishes. She was taller now. Quieter. Too, but not from sadness. From growth. I saw Dad in the way she handled things, steady, kind, paying attention to the small stuff. "Can I keep the candles?" she asked. "The ones in the jars?"
Yeah.
"They still have some light left." That sentence stayed with me. They still have some light left. A few days later, Nathan came over with Rosie and handed me a manila folder. "What's this?" I asked. "A grant proposal. For the watchlight. State funding. It could help us expand, maybe even open another one." I blinked. "You wrote this?" He scratched his neck. "Mostly Rosie. I did the stapling." Rosie beamed. "Dad says stapling is 90% of paperwork." We laughed. It felt good. Easy. The way family should feel, not perfect but present. Later that evening, I walked into the backyard and sat on the edge of the garden bed. The lilacs were starting to fade. The marigolds had dropped their last petals. Everything was winding down. That's when I noticed something, half buried in the soil. A small rock. Painted. I brushed it off. On it were 2 words in blocky handwriting. "I'm here." I turned it over. On the back.
Ervu.
I didn't know if Dad had painted it, or if someone had done it in his memory. Maybe it didn't matter. He was here.
He always had been.
That weekend, Ellie and I visited Willow Lane again. The kids were making a memory wall. Each child drew someone they missed and wrote one line about them. One boy wrote, "My grandpa had a candy drawer and never said no." Another wrote, "My mom smelled like pancakes and rain." Ellie drew a picture of Grandpa Robert with a scarf, surrounded by lilacs. Underneath she wrote, "He said I was enough even when I wasn't trying." That line undid me. I stepped outside to breathe. On the way home, Ellie said, "Sometimes I still miss him a lot." "I do too," I replied. "But it's not like before," she added. "Now when I miss him, I also remember the things he taught me." "Like what?" She looked out the window. "Like how the sky talks to the ground during storms. Like how being quiet can be powerful. And how leaving a porch light on means you believe someone might come back." I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "That's a good memory to keep." She nodded. "I think memories are like breadcrumbs. You follow them, and they bring you back to love." That night, I added one last entry to my letterbox, the one marked for Ellie. "When it's time." "You asked once if Grandpa would be proud of us." I think he would be. Not because we got everything right, but because we tried. Because we kept showing up. Because we let love matter more than pride or fear. And because we left the light on not just for others, but for ourselves. Then I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it next to the others. A few months later, just before winter, I stood in front of a new sign. The Watchlight, a community of remembrance and hope. Beneath it, etched in smaller letters. Founded in honor of Robert Whitmore. Leave the light on. As people gathered for another shared meal, I stepped back and watched them laugh, pass bread, exchange stories. Some were strangers. Some were now chosen family. Dad had given me a house. I had turned it into a home for many. And maybe that's the legacy that matters. Not what we keep, but what we give away. Not what we build for ourselves, but what we build for others. And what remains after we're gone? Quiet, steady, glowing. That night, for the first time in a long time, I stood on the porch, lit the candle Ellie had saved, and whispered, "I'm here, too." And the light stayed on. It had been nearly a year since Dad passed. Time, I learned, doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, stutters. It sneaks up on you while you're tying your shoes or pouring your coffee. One minute you're thinking about the grocery list, and the next, you're back in that hospital room or standing on his porch, wondering if you said enough. I still couldn't answer that question, but I had stopped punishing myself for it. The Watchlight was steady now. The rooms had been painted and repainted, sometimes by professionals, sometimes by volunteers with more heart than brush control. The community garden was thriving. The kitchen always had the smell of something warm, chili, bread, cinnamon. Ellie called it the breathing house. I liked that, because that's what it felt like, a place that didn't just stand still, but exhaled. One afternoon, while sorting through the filing cabinets we'd inherited from the original house, I found a folder tucked behind a row of insurance documents. Inside were Polaroids.
Dozens of them.
Some I recognized, Dad at my graduation, Mom holding Nathan as a baby. But others were strangers. People I'd never seen. Men and women of all ages.
Kids.
A few even had names scribbled on the back. Elaine, cancer survivor. Tommy, first A in math. Marcus, 9 years sober. I brought them to Nathan. Any idea what these are? He flipped through them slowly, mouth slightly open. I think these are all people Dad helped, he said. We found a note tucked into the last photo. You don't have to be known by the world to make a mark. Just be remembered by the ones who needed you most. I created a wall in the Watchlight to display the photos. People started adding their own. A teacher who helped them through junior high. A neighbor who walked them home every day. A grandmother who used to sing lullabies about stars that watched us sleep. Ellie brought in a picture of Dad from the garden. He was good at sitting still, she said, and pinned it in the center. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs, poured a glass of water, and stood by the kitchen window. The porch light was on. A moth circled it, tapping against the glass like it couldn't decide whether to enter or escape. I thought of all the things I'd misunderstood about my father, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to love someone quietly. We grow up thinking love is noise, fireworks, grand gestures, holidays with ribbon and sparkle. But Dad's love was steady.
Soft.
And because of that, I used to think it was small. I was wrong. Nathan and I began working on a book, small, simple, handmade. Stories from the Watchlight. Lessons from Dad. Reflections from visitors. We called it Leave the Light On, Letters to Those Who Stayed. We didn't plan to publish it. We just wanted to hold something in our hands that said, we were here. We loved. We remembered. Rosie designed the cover. Ellie wrote the dedication. For anyone who thinks they're not enough, you already are. Months later, a woman named Colleen came to one of our Thursday dinners.
She didn't eat.
Just walked around the garden in silence. Eventually, she joined me on the bench under the porch. You knew Robert Whitmore? She asked. I nodded. He was my father. She smiled. He saved my son's life. I turned to her, stunned.
How?
He found him behind the pharmacy one winter. Overdosed. Stayed with him. Called 911. Paid for his rehab with a check he said was for roof repairs. Never told anyone. I couldn't speak. Colleen reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter. Your father wrote this to my son. He kept it under his pillow until he passed. I unfolded it. The ink was faded, but the words clear. It's never too late to come back to yourself. You don't have to be who you were yesterday. Just show up today. That's enough.
Ervo.
I felt something shift in my chest. A settling.
A release.
That Sunday, we hosted a candlelight walk.
No speeches.
No music. Just people holding light in glass jars, walking through the garden as dusk fell. Each person left a candle at the edge of the garden path. By the end of the night, the yard looked like a map of stars fallen to earth. I stood back and watched Ellie explain the names of the plants to Rosie. I watched Nathan fix the fence gate again. I watched the light stretch and scatter across the yard like a memory refusing to fade. When we got home, Ellie asked if we could write another letter to Grandpa. I know he can't read it, she said, but it helps. She wrote, Dear Grandpa, I made a new friend today. Her name is Amanda. She doesn't have a mom, so I let her borrow mine. I think that's okay.
Love.
Ellie. She folded it carefully and placed it in our family memory box. Then she whispered, I hope the light reaches him. I whispered back, It already has. Grief doesn't get smaller, but our hearts grow large enough to hold it better. Love doesn't end. It becomes the light we leave behind. I used to think legacy was something built. Buildings.
Books.
Businesses. Wealth passed down through names printed on envelopes and plaques. But now I know better. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who remembers why you mattered. My father never ran a company. He never climbed a corporate ladder. He didn't leave us trust funds or beachfront properties. What he left was far quieter. He left a garden, a porch light, a room full of mismatched chairs where strangers became family. And more than anything, he left behind the belief that showing up for someone was enough. It took me years to understand the difference between regret and responsibility. Regret keeps you in the past. Responsibility invites you to do better now. I can't change the fact that I didn't answer his call the first time. I can't undo the times I made excuses, said I was busy, told myself next weekend. But I can honor him. I can teach Ellie that love isn't about showing up only when it's convenient. It's about presence, patience, kindness that costs nothing and yet means everything. Some nights, I still hear his voice. Not in a ghostly way, just in the way memories linger. When I double-check the back door. When I make too much soup and freeze the extra just in case. When Ellie runs into the kitchen and announces, we should invite the neighbors for chilly night. And especially when I flick on the porch light without thinking, instinct now. Habit. Muscle memory born from love. We held a memorial for him 1 year after his passing. Not in a church. Not in a funeral home. At the watchlight. Under the oak tree. We invited everyone, anyone who had ever met him, been helped by him, or simply knew someone who had. People came with stories. Laughter.
Tears.
One woman said, He once gave me a ride home in the rain, and we never spoke again. But I still remember the song he played. Moon River. A man in his 40s said, He paid for my gas once. I told him I'd pay him back. He said, Just promise me you'll help the next person who looks as tired as you do. I've done that 20 times since. Ellie read aloud from one of his letters. If you can't fix the whole world, at least don't make it heavier for someone already struggling to carry it. When it was my turn, I didn't have a speech. I stood up with a candle and said, simply, I missed a lot while he was alive, but I've spent the last year learning how to see him properly. And I see him in all of you. We passed a basket of matches. Everyone lit their own candle. By the time the sun went down, the oak tree was surrounded by firelight, small but defiant. A constellation of memory. After the ceremony, Ellie and I stayed behind. She asked, Mom, what do you think happens when we die? I thought carefully. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think if we've loved well, the people we loved carry pieces of us forward. She nodded. Like Grandpa's letters. Exactly. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm going to write letters too. I hope you do. Then she looked up at me and whispered, You're like him, you know. I didn't answer, but something in me softened. In the months that followed, we received more letters. Some were addressed to the Watchlight, some to Robert Whitmore's family. Others had no address at all, just stories that people needed to send somewhere.
We started archiving them.
Creating a living history. One letter read, "I walked into your community center by accident. I was on my way to end my life, but someone handed me tea and asked how my day was. I hadn't heard that question in 2 months. I'm still here." Another said, "I read your father's story online. I called my dad. We hadn't spoken in 7 years. Thank you." And another, "I left my porch light on for the first time in 12 years. Here's the truth. You don't need to save the world. You don't need to be known. You just need to notice. The people who sit alone. The friends who cancel plans but never say why. The neighbors whose names you forgot. The parents you assume will always be there. You notice. You reach. You leave the light on. Not because you're certain they'll return, but because it says, I still believe you might. You're still worth waiting for. You're not alone." I think that was my father's quiet revenge. Not against death, but against invisibility. He fought it by seeing people others ignored, by remembering their names, by telling stories, by planting flowers in front yards that didn't belong to him. He lost battles like we all do, but he won something deeper. He made sure love didn't vanish just because time moved on. This story began with a missed phone call. It ends with an open door, a porch light, a daughter who finally understood, and a world made slightly brighter, one kindness at a time. So, tonight, if you're reading this, I invite you. Call someone. Write a letter. Bring soup. Look up from your screen when someone sits next to you. And when you go home,
Leave the light on.
just in case.